That's glitter. Don't open that, okay? I don't know where it came from, but let's try not to spill it, because glitter, if you get glitter on stuff, it just goes everywhere and it's hard to clean up.
Remember
It's also microplastic pollution.
When I accidentally spilled some glitter on my dirt?
Yeah, and it's hard to clean up, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we gotta be very careful with glitter.
I just used it up.
Yeah.
With my water.
Mhm. Where did you get that glitter?
From the big people.
Oh, okay. Make sure you ask before you use glitter, because it can make a big mess. All right. All right. What did we get? Seth, I'm getting ready to talk to my class again on the computer. So I might not be able to talk to you much in a minute. I don't know what this is. Sassy, do you know what this is? It's like a little pirate skull, but it's got clay on it or something. Do you know what that is? I just found it on the floor. It's okay if you don't know.
Some sort of treasure.
Yeah, maybe it was some kind of...
Maybe someone found it outside. Because all the stuff is from outside.
Yeah, okay. What is this? It looks like a bean. Some kind of seed.
Well, maybe the seed from all the things that we ate, they look like that.
Okay, but don't eat those. I don't know what those are, so don't eat those. Well, I gotta talk to my class, okay? Alright. Alright, hey, so it looks like I got 7 viewers. Sorry, I was kind of getting started slowly there, just chatting with my daughter. So, hello, I've got 8 viewers. Good, okay, well, let's get started. So, welcome to the stream for today. Today we're going to be talking about, continuing our conversation about the Mike Daisy podcasts. And I do want to make this a bit more of a conversation. This is something that, a different modality, I guess, for engaging. And I put an announcement in earlier this morning explaining my different idea for today, and did it once at the 10 o'clock stream, and so I'm trying it again now at the 11 o'clock. Basically, I'm going to just pose questions and put them into the chat kind of one at a time, and then follow those questions wherever they go. That'll be a big difference. So the other thing I put, in case you didn't get to respond to the questions from Wednesday, I put those as discussions in your Canvas groups. Like each Canvas group has its own homepage, and I put a discussion thread there with that information. So like you can respond to those there if you'd like. If you already responded in Slack, you don't have to do it again. But those Slack responses that you did, as you noticed, you probably noticed a lot of those are really rich, really interesting, long, like multi-paragraph responses, which are great. But they're kind of hard to engage with in Slack because it's just one big block of text, and there might be one part that I'm interested in, but I can't sort of reply to that one part very easily. So it's a little bit easier to do in Canvas when you have longer opportunities for writing. So that's my request, is that we try to move that kind of conversation over there. But for Slack, we need that attachment. For Slack, I think we can do quicker conversation, more real time. So I'm going to pose some questions and then chat with you about those questions in the channel, and then later pose a different version of those questions on the Canvas discussion pages in case you want to respond to it there. And so you can have the discussion asynchronously. So that, like, if you're not watching this live, if you're watching a recording, then you can just go to Canvas and then reply to that discussion thread. Or if you're watching and you just want to do it later, you can do it that way as well. So I guess big news, you probably heard that we're postponing commencement to the fall instead of just canceling it. I know a handful of you are graduating this semester. So that's obviously big news for you, and that's good news for you, I think. I signed the petition when it went around. There's a Facebook petition going around. yesterday I signed it. So I think it's good. I think it makes sense. We have the ability to put together a commencement event. We can just do it at a different time. It might be different depending on when it is. Like the weather might not be great if we wait too long, but yeah, that's fine. We can figure those things out later. And part of what I like about that decision is that it's later. Like we get to think about it in terms of the future. And for me right now, thinking about the future is good. I don't know about how you're dealing with all the news and things, but I'm getting it's kind of hard. Like it's hard for me to work honestly. So I get distracted and anxious about the news. But thinking about the future helps me. Like thinking about things that are going to be happening in 5 or 6 months. That's nice. I like that because that's a time when probably we won't be dealing with the same things we are now. So that's something that I like just for that reason. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about the podcast from This American Life, and a number of you had some interesting responses to the initial set of questions, and so part of what I have in mind is kind of following up to that, but also looking a bit more closely at the modality of audio and how the podcast format really works and delivers that content. So I guess let me know if you can't hear me or if you have any issues. I think I got all the audio balanced out in the first stream this morning. I am in a different location, as you can probably tell. This is my sunroom, and there's, it's a nice day outside. I like having all the light out here. It gets a little cool out here if there's not, like if it's cold outside because there's no insulation. So I don't know if I'll be out here on Monday because it's going to be colder, but we'll see. So actually, be careful. Don't climb. Don't stand up on that. Okay.
But
What are you doing? Don't. Okay. Yeah, but don't stand up on that. Okay. Sorry, I have company out here. So, and by the way, I don't know. You can see we have a bird feeder out there, and sometimes the squirrels are getting it. And I've been trying to keep them out. So, if you happen to see a squirrel jump on there, let me know so I can yell at it. I've had to scare him off a couple times. There's one squirrel that we've nicknamed Popcorn because it acts really bouncy, and it's been coming back today. So let me know if you see Popcorn. Okay, so let me play a bit of the audio. So the This American Life episode, the retraction episode, there's a key moment in here that I want to spend some time thinking about, and so I'm going to play it for you, and you can pull it up yourself, but if you want to. But it's around the 29-minute mark in the podcast. So I'll play a few seconds before, and then this particular moment, and then ask you to talk about it just a little bit. Okay. So here it goes.
Something that I inserted in the monologue based on things I had read and things I had heard in Hong Kong. But instead, you lied further and you said you wrote the workers were from Wintech, not Foxconn. Why not just tell us what really happened at that point? I think I was terrified. Of what? That I think I was terrified that if I untied these things, that the work that I know is really good and tells a story, that does these really great things for making people care, that it would come apart.
I wanted him to finish his thought there, but the main thing that I wanted you to hear in that segment was the silence. There are two really long pauses in there. The first one, I counted about 13 seconds of silence. The next one was about 7 or 8 seconds. For a podcast, that's a very long time for silence. If you think about I initially heard this on the radio. If you think of how dead air sounds on the radio, it can sound stressful. It can sound a lot like you think, well, I guess the station shut off, right? Or maybe my car radio is broken or something like that. You kind of worry about what's there. So silence can be really significant in media. So my first question that I'm going to pose to you, and I'm going to pull it back up. Where did Slack go? there's Slack. So so my first question for this chat, what does the silence here do for or to you as a listener? So think about, like, how does it make you feel? And just post your thoughts in Slack. You know, let's use the Twitch chat for Twitch specific things, but you know, your thoughts about that silence. Put that in Slack. What do you think? And I'll give you a few minutes to type. This is several people are typing, so I'll let you type your thoughts. So I see that M is upside down. The first letter. Do you see which letter is upside down?
You mean this one?
No, that one's right side up. There's another M. That one, yeah. See, it's up, when it's upside down, it looks like a W. So.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't notice it at first either. Those aren't edible, are they? No, I don't eat them. They look like gummy things, but I think they're just goo. Okay, so
Thank you.
Jessica's got a thought. Yeah, and I think, so to agree with Jessica, yeah, I think he earlier in the podcast, he's kind of coming up with explanations. Like he's saying, well, it was actually this, and well, it was that, right? But at this point, this is where things really turn dramatically. Yeah, really interesting. Yeah, so Brian, great point. That's a really interesting observation. The idea of connection, you know, or subjectivity, right? So, I mean, you know what he's saying, you understand, and you ultimately kind of sympathize with him, right? I mean, I think, and maybe you do, but I do. I feel terrible for him. Like, I feel like this is an awful moment. I mean, obviously he messed up, but I've made mistakes in my life, and, you know, and it's something that I can relate to. And yeah, and as Ian's pointing out, it does make him seem remorseful, right? Like you get his feeling of regret in that moment, if nothing else. But yeah, so Sarah, I think ultimately, yeah, he is super hesitant. Yeah, but ultimately, like what I'm interested in is like what Ashley's pointing out here, is that discomfort. The discomfort is really interesting. I mean, all these things that we're talking about are kind of a result of this experience of that discomfort, I think. Like you can tell that he's thinking hard, right? And Emily, great point about the difference in the transcript. I have the transcript pulled up here, and you're right. It really is not. I have to Google to find Control F to find the right point. Yeah, so this is that point in the transcripts. You know, he says, "Why not just tell us what really happened?" Long pause. Mike Daisy, I think I was terrified. Breathing. Of what? Long pause. That long pause. Like we just see the words long pause in brackets there as kind of a stage direction. We don't experience that pause. These are pauses of different lengths, and that's not indicated in the transcript at all. Like it doesn't say 13-second pause or 8-second pause, which might have had a little bit more of an effect or similarity to the original thing, but experiencing it directly is what makes it so weird. Yeah, like maybe panic, like Courtney's saying. Like you can kind of see the panic in his eyes or hear it in his lack of speaking. You know, it's all those things that results from that moment of silence. Another thing too about the silence is that it's not exactly silence, right? Like as I was pausing there, you might have heard birds singing or in the background, or like I think a train was going by. Daniel, can I help you with something? Okay. It's Daniel. What was I saying? Yeah, silence is never silent, especially in this house. There's always something making noise in our house, or someone making noise in this house. And so there are different kinds of silence, is what I'm interested in noticing. So, and you know, I would just even say, yeah, it leaves us wondering. Right? Let me respond to Lillian here. How is that not? There it is. It leaves us, I think, hanging because we're not sure what's going to happen next. Dana, can you do that somewhere else?
Okay.
Thanks. He's got the lightsabers out. Yeah, so it's this idea that like there's no, I can't think of a plausible answer. Like I would not be able to think of a plausible answer. But we hear him really stuck there. He's like, "You lied." Okay, so what is he possibly going to say? Yeah, so silence again is really interesting to me in different contexts. Here, I think it does a lot to create tension, and then this tension really pulls us into the drama of that moment of like wondering what he's going to say, feeling sympathy with him as a person. We may still disagree with him or dislike what he did, but we understand him as a person through that, and that silence I think really pulls us into that moment. So here's another question. Can you think of other moments of significant silence in media? So it could be audio, I guess, or in movies, if you can think of something like that. We thought of a couple in the previous section, but just think off the top of your head, like what's something, like when has there been a moment of silence or a lack of sound in film that you can think of, or other media that really had an effect dramatically? Some people typing, so I'll let you type. What you got there? Okay, don't drop it. Glad the sun's coming out. I think it's going to be cloudy later, but I like the sun for now. It's definitely warm, which I like. And if you can't think of a specific example, maybe a kind of example. Oh, interesting. I'm curious, like, it seems like there are some practical questions that would come up if you were trying to do the, like in dance, like you would have to keep track of each other. And if you didn't have music to cue those moments, that could be really challenging, I think. I mean, I'm not a dancer, but I imagine that that's something that's important to do. So Blue Bloods is that's the TV show with what's his name? I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I remember I caught a little bit of an episode once. Oh yeah, The Quiet Place, right? I have not seen that movie, but obviously that is a movie about silence, I guess. So, I mean, from the title and from the pieces of it I've seen, that's what I've gathered. Yeah. So can you say, Aaron? Can you say a bit more about that? So I haven't seen that. Can you tell us a bit more about how it plays out? I mean, like one thing, like in film, there's two broad types of sound. There's diegetic, meaning it happens in the scene, and so like in film, so diegetic means like the sounds that are happening there that the characters in the scene can hear. And then non-diegetic sound is usually music, so that's background music. And non-diegetic music can be very powerful in terms of telling you how to feel about a particular scene. And there's lots of very well-established methods for doing that. So things like a single violin note, like a high violin note, often creates a moment of tension and kind of creates a feeling of holding your breath in. Think of like the soaring, like epic soundtrack of like the Avengers movies during a battle scene. Like there's ways in which the sound really just gives you a lot of information emotionally, and like just instructions basically for how to proceed with the scene. So some films are really interesting in that they take out sound, so there is no diegetic there is no non-diegetic sound. I can't think of examples off the top of my head, but lots of films that try any films that try like a cinema verite or kind of a realistic style will usually lack that. There's a lot of examples of that. One of my favorites is Children of Men, and I don't believe there is any non-diegetic sound in that movie. I have not watched it recently, so I want to watch it again for that reason. But in Children of Men, anyway, they have lots of really interesting cinematography that makes it feel really believable and realistic, and a lot of the cinematic cues that you would normally get for how to interpret a scene or even a shot are switched or replaced with something else that makes the film feel very tense. And I'm pretty sure there's no non-diegetic sound. Okay, so the plot is there are creatures that depend on sound, so the family is using sign language. Yeah, so it's almost a silent. So yeah, it would probably have neither. But I assume there is diegetic sound at some point because I haven't seen the movie, but I assume at some point, like people get killed, so they must make sounds and then get killed. So. Oh yeah, right. So that's sort of an awkward one, right? Let's see. Yeah, and so somebody's doing the emoji response. This is good. These are the kinds of things. Is there a microphone? Yeah. Sometimes you can do microphone. You can do other kinds of emoji responses besides the smiley faces or thumbs up, just to indicate whatever you feel like. So yeah, that's a way to kind of acknowledge that without necessarily following up on it. Yeah, that's definitely awkward, especially when you have remote reporters that are far enough away that there's a lag between the speakers, so there's that awkward, over talking. It is right, and so what's interesting, Marcus, is like there's plenty of things to distract us all the time, and so it takes some work for something to be interesting enough for us to pay attention to it in that moment of silence that that we have to be pulled into it. If we're not there to begin with, we're not going to be compelled by that silence. We're not going to be able to enjoy it. But we have to, once we're compelled, once we get to experience that quiet, that can be really interesting. It can be reflective or contemplative, as I think you're suggesting. Back to you, Jeff. Yeah. Okay, great. So one example that did come up, and someone in the last hour found the link for it, is this one here. So this is a spoiler, by the way, if you haven't seen The Last Jedi, but this is a moment of silence from that movie. And I'll play the whole scene just to show you the build up to it. But it's a moment that I remember seeing flyers at the theater saying, like, by the way, there is a moment of silence that occurs in this film. It's not an error. There's not a problem with the audio. So I guess people were surprised by it so much that they complained or asked a question about it. But I'll see if I can just play this here. This is a spoiler for a dramatic moment. This is a spoiler for a dramatic moment near the end of this movie, so I guess sorry for that. If you would rather not spoil this moment, you can just look away, I guess. But I wanted to play it here.
Jump to light speed. It's empty. They're just trying to pull our attention away. Pathetic. Keep your fire on the transports. On my command. She's running away. Oh, she is.
Yeah, just a beautiful shot. I mean, and beautifully filmed sequence there. I think of the sequel movies, Last Jedi is probably my favorite, and mainly for that scene. Honestly, I think it's amazing. Um, but you see all the drama, all the different plot lines kind of converging on this moment, and it's it's very intense visually and audially, like you hear it. But again, you kind of don't hear nothing. Like it's not an absence. It's a very felt presence. Which is what's interesting about silence. Even as I was playing it here, you might have heard birds singing or wind or other things as well. So it's never totally silent. Just a couple of other thoughts about silence. This is kind of weird, to be honest. So I apologize in advance for weirdness, but it's part of the things I'm interested in. But I've been interested in silence for a while, silence in media. For example, there's a famous John Cage composition called 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, or 4:33, where the performer puts the score on the piano and then waits 4 minutes and 33 seconds or about that and then leaves. And what you find if you ever get to see it performed is that it's not silence. It's not just nothing. The content of the piece is the audience reaction or the sounds of the theater, people coughing, shuffling, whatever. That becomes the content of the piece. It's just not piano music. So silence can be interesting. And this is, again, this is a weird thing, but it's something I did, so I thought I'd share it. So there's a writer named William S. Burroughs, and this journal called Enculturation put out a call for creative, critical pieces responding to William S. Burroughs. They gave us this audio of a lecture he gave, then asked people to remix it in different ways. So my remix was to edit out all of his words. So all that's left are the pieces or the moments between when he's speaking. And so, as you'll hear, there are some things left. So it's about 2 minutes long. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but basically what you hear if you listen, and I don't know if you could hear it all through this, but you'll hear him taking a deep breath before he speaks. You'll hear him turning pages. You'll hear him writing with a pencil at one point. I think a train goes by at another point. So there's all these ways in which we're being mindful of William S. Burroughs' presence in that moment and his physical body as he's giving this lecture. But we're not hearing his words or what he says. We're just kind of experiencing this kind of thing, this kind of moment with him. It is kind of like ASMR, which some people enjoy, I guess, ASMR videos. But that was something I did. Another thing I did, and this one's even weirder, so let me explain it first. So for the William S. Burroughs piece, I did that manually. I just opened up his lecture in Audacity, and then I just moved the playhead back and forth, and then cut out all of the audio forms that were speech. It was kind of labor intensive, but not too bad. There is software that can do similar things. If you know what you're looking for, you can write code that will slice up the pieces of audio or video that you're interested in, and you can create what's called a supercut. Like Jimmy Fallon does a segment with supercuts, for example. You've probably seen this kind of thing. So I did that, and I did that with this is from the 2016 elections, a debate between the two candidates, and it's even more intensely weird, so I will not play the whole thing. I find it really weird now. It's a lot of breathing. And so it's like breathing and mouth noises. It's very uncomfortable, actually. And all that inhaling, I think, after a while kind of makes you feel like you're hyperventilating. Like it makes me feel nervous just listening to it. So I'm not going to play all that. But that's just an example of how it's not quite silence. It's a kind of silence, though, and it is yet very significant or effective. And what I think is interesting about the yeah, you're right. So the host gets sipping coffee. Like you hear that sometimes, or turning a page. You hear it more on the like on the Radio IQ news. I feel like I hear them turning pages a lot more, like the local one. So all that's to say, there are different kinds of silence, and I think one thing that each of these has in common, going back to Brian's points, is a connection to someone. So there's an automatic kind of subjectivity. So let me play the Mike Daisy thing just again, and let me draw your attention to one more thing about it. Zoom back here.
Further, and you said you wrote the workers were from WinTech, not Foxconn. Why not just tell us what really happened at that point? I think I was terrified.
So notice how Mike Daisy breaks that silence. So it's not, he's no longer coming up with excuses or explanations. He's terrified. He says, I think I was terrified. And he wants us to understand his terror as the story now. Like he wants us to think about his experience of these events, not the fact of how he did it or the case of whether it's true and all that. Like he's now wanting us to focus on him, and he's trying to turn the story around to be about him and his art and his piece. And that's understandable in the circumstances, but I think it's also very deliberate. And I think it's using that silence to kind of, I mean, the editors of this piece they know this too, I think, and they're asking us to experience that moment with him, and then it becomes a story about him. Now the story goes on, right? I mean, this is near the end of when Mike, Daisy, and Ira Glass are talking. The next segment after this, the third act of this episode, they talk through kind of what's actually going on in China. But it's really interesting that this is sort of where we're left. So it is still an interesting story. It has a kind of meaning to it, but it's Mike Daisy's meaning, and it's a story about Mike Daisy, not about Apple at this point. And that's why it's maybe less valuable in terms of what it might have otherwise done as a piece of journalism, but still really compelling, I think, just as a story about a person. Even if we don't like this person, we're still interested in it, and we want to understand it. So that's something that I think this audio piece does really well, and that the transcript doesn't convey at all. Like the transcript doesn't do this at all, in my opinion. It's there as a reference. It's good to have, but if you can't hear it, if you don't get to hear it the way that it's written out or the way it's performed and edited, then you don't experience it that way. You don't get that same outcome from it. Okay, so my kind of final question is, and this is something that we'll see how long we have to take. We don't have to spend forever talking about this in Slack, but just to kind of put one more thing in here. So with all that said, what's really going on? So you've got an object selected for the archaeology plan B, hopefully. So what is that manufacturer's track record regarding labor? So what I've mentioned a couple times before is like Apple is pretty transparent. Like they put out reports every year saying kind of how they're doing in terms of labor and conflict minerals and things like that. Samsung also has a pretty decent set of things. I have a Samsung phone, so earlier I looked up the information from Samsung, and I found a couple of things. Let's see where to go. I linked to it earlier, so let me just go back up to that. So yeah, Matthew Simmons found the page for Apple, and then this is the one from Samsung. I didn't dig much into this yet because this is it's actually a lot here. This just seemed like a good starting point, and this is about their supply chain, I think. Well, this is about their labor practice, but let's see what the supply chain says. So, okay, so they're talking about their suppliers and what they expect of their suppliers, and so this is all good. I'm just trying to see if there's any actual reports. Like these are kind of saying what they expect, but let's see. Okay, so this is cool. So this is where, remember we were learning about coltan recently. This is their report about coltan, and they are noting that they are requiring that their suppliers be certified conflict-free, I guess. That's interesting. So let's see. There's similar. I'm hoping there are similar reports for labor. Okay, so this is kind of a technical document, but probably needs to be interpreted a little bit. But at least they're saying, I mean, what this is reporting is that these suppliers, these smelters and refiners are compliant with their expectations. But there's a lot of interesting other detail in here that might be fun to tease out a little bit more. My request is see if you can find the thing for yours. Like if you have something that's not Samsung or Apple, you may not be able to tell, but certainly there's a very good chance that whatever you have has some component that was produced at Foxconn or Wintech. Like circuit boards, right? I mean, that's a big thing of what Foxconn does. Even molded plastic. I don't have it with me, but the Atari 2600, sometimes when I do this assignment, I take apart the Atari 2600 instead of the N64 like I did for you all. And the background of Foxconn as a company, their first contract that they ever got and fulfilled was the connector cables for Atari 2600 joysticks. So I have some of those originals, and that's a connection to Foxconn right there. Even though at the time the motherboards for Atari 2600s, they were originally made in Silicon Valley, like in California, and then they shipped that to Hong Kong afterward, and then they were assembled all together. And the one I have was assembled in Malaysia, I think. So it's interesting how that supply chain already in the early 1980s was global and went to these same places that we're still paying attention to now in terms of responsibility. So it looks like Courtney and I think Jessica were typing, and so I'll let you type your thought. But if this is something you want to work on a little bit later, that's fine too. I'll put these questions into Canvas discussions so you can write longer. Okay. Okay, so I just saw a couple of questions in the Twitch chat. So, and you should put these in Slack, by the way. But let me see if I can clarify or answer your question. Okay, great. So, okay, so that's the starting point. Like Logitech is obviously a very prolific manufacturer. They make a lot of different kinds of things. I'm using a Logitech webcam, for example, right now. So, yeah, see what you can find out. I mean, they might have information out there as a company. Like usually you'll find this in the context of corporate messaging. Like this is what I found for Samsung. Like most Samsung consumers aren't shopping with this stuff in mind, but investors are. Like investors want to make sure to invest ethically, or in ways that in companies that they know are going to be sustainable. Okay, so there are a couple of questions in Twitch, and I wanted to answer those on the stream here before I wrap it up. So Siobhan was asking about timeline.js and slides appearing out of order. I'll see if I can pull up an example and see if I can understand see if I can demonstrate how to control that. It might take me a minute to find the spreadsheet I created the other day, but let me do that. While that's coming up, there was another question about just from Creative Sparks 24. Yeah, I can get to that too in a second. Let me see if I can let me find this first. Okay. So this is my spreadsheet I created, and you kind of still need to keep, like you have to use the timeline website as well as having your spreadsheet on hand. Why isn't this showing up in my recents? Maybe because I did this at school, that's why. Different computer. So my computer runs a little slow when it's streaming, so hopefully this will come along here shortly. So it's coming. It's coming. Make a timeline. I already have the spreadsheet template. Where's the link? The place where I dropped the link. So once the URL, drop that here. There it goes, finally. So this is the demo one that I put together the other day. And all this is doing, and so this is Siobhan's question about the order. It really is just the date. So if it's showing up in a different order, you should double check the date that you've got each slide listed at. And for these dates, you can do them as a range like it's set up here, but you can also just do it as a single date, so you can delete the endpoints. It at least has to have a year for the starting point. And if you do that, it'll be like January 1st of that year. But that's where it'll pin itself in place on the timeline, but that's fine most of the time. If you're not sure about something, you can give it a range, so it might be 2011 to 2012, and then it'll show up as a bar. And so that might impact the order that you see it in. So let me see if I can replicate that here. Yeah, so it shows up like this. Here's where I am now. That's the one that has that range in it. So that's the order, and so that's really all there is to it in terms of the order. One thing to watch out for, I don't know if this is the issue you run into, Siobhan, but what you have to do is you have to make sure that each row has something in it except for the first row. So the first row shouldn't have any date in it, or it can be blank. It can also be a date if it's the earliest date. But this one, every row after that has to have content, and if you skip a row, then it'll break. Like either the whole timeline might break, or at least you won't be able to get anything after it. That's an issue sometimes when I have multiple people editing the same timeline. People will accidentally leave a line blank like that, and that has to be fixed later. But that's the issue. If you're continuing to have no, you don't have to make an end date, Siobhan. You can do it without the end dates. Just the starting one's fine. And also, you can share the spreadsheet with me if you're still stuck on it, and I can take a look at it and see what you're seeing, and before you turn it in, and that might be a good way to troubleshoot something like that. So to do that, you can just hopefully you can see this on the screen here. You go to the share button and send me the edit link, and then I can double check it to make sure it works. Hello. What are you doing? All right, I have an audience. So those are my children. So the other question, oh yeah, great point. So Courtney has pointed out that the DKC can also help with things like Timeline.js. They do tutorials on Timeline. They do tutorials on Timeline pretty frequently, and so I'm not sure. Let me pull up their website. And Courtney, you can help me clarify if I get this wrong, but they're doing online. Yes, doing online appointments. So it's the same booking system, I think. It's just that you'll schedule it and you'll carry out the actual tutorial through a video conference. So they're still doing the same kinds of things, just doing them remotely. All right, so book a remote appointment. This goes into EAB, and I can't do that, but you'll hope. Actually, I don't know. Maybe I can. Let me see if I can. Because I'm faculty, whenever I get into this system, I see things differently than students, so I might not actually be able to book an appointment with the DKC. Yeah, maybe I can. Oh, great, I can. Or no, I can't. Yeah, I think this is just because I'm faculty. So if you're a student, hopefully you would see something here. And then you'd be able to follow up with them and get that scheduled. And I know they've been doing these, so I assume this actually does work. But it just doesn't because I'm faculty. All right, I'll close that out. So Creative Sparks had a question about how to find things. So let me go through your options for Plan B. So this is in Canvas. So the Digital Archaeology Project is brand new. I mean, rewritten from the original. So it's a Plan B version now. And in that version, in that document, you'll see that you've got 3 options for which story you tell. I want you to use Timeline.js or something similar. And you've got 3 different stories you can tell. You can either tell the prehistory, the lived history, or the afterlife. You don't really need to take apart your device unless you're trying to tell the prehistory story. If you are trying to tell the prehistory story, you probably need to take it apart. I can give advice, but I can't really give you supplies to take these things apart. So it might be impractical. One thing somebody suggested, I think it was just over an email conversation, was if you are interested in a device that has a pretty well documented takedown video or teardown video that someone's done, like if you find it on YouTube where someone has taken apart their Nintendo DS or whatever, you could use that as information, and you could extrapolate from that video's teardown to your own device. And I think that would be a reasonable compromise. Otherwise, you kind of just have to guess, and that's not very good. So I would really encourage you, if you can't take your device apart and you can't find a teardown video or some other documentation that someone else has done for theirs, then I would say choose one of the other two stories, so the lived history or the afterlife. The lived history is your story of that of living with this device and its life with you, and then the afterlife is what you speculate about how it's going to live or what's going to happen to it later. So that's something that you're kind of guessing on. Or you're speculating, but it's an educated guess based on what we're going to learn about e-waste recycling next week. So hopefully, Creative Sparks. I think that's Wednesday. If you hopefully that answers your question, but of course, reach out if not, I'd be happy to try to clarify further. So yeah. All right, so I am going to wrap it up. I'm going about 45 minutes, so I'm going to wrap this one up pretty soon. If you have any more questions, try to get them in there, and I can respond on stream. Otherwise, I'll respond later. I wanted to tell you too that I see you. Stop messing around. That I may be taking some time away from the internet over the weekend. I'm like you all, just kind of overwhelmed with all the news, and so I may or may not be responding that quickly. I kind of go back and forth. Sometimes I really enjoy being immersed in class stuff and email and solving problems, and sometimes just being near a screen and being online can really increase my anxiety. So I'm kind of going back and forth between those two things. I might be taking some time away. I might be doing some information isolation this weekend. So if that's the case, I may not be able to respond that quickly. Yeah, we all probably can't see it because of the brightness, but my kids are goofing around out there and trying to distract me. So I should probably wrap it up. Okay, so thanks for watching the stream. If you have any questions, of course, reach out in Slack or email or Canvas or whatever. But I'll post a asynchronous version of these discussion questions that we went through today just now in your Canvas discussion pages. So feel free to join in on those. And really, the point of having those discussions in those smaller groups is so that you can talk to each other. I mean, I'll monitor them too, but it's really about connecting with people and having that sense of community, which I think works a little better asynchronously in a format like a discussion board as opposed to Slack. So, all right, well, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks for watching. I'll put these streams on YouTube later, and they'll be there for reference if you need it. But yeah, otherwise, thanks for chatting, and have a good weekend. And stop.